Good evening, this is Blaine Bridges with Pop Philosophy. I have a question for you. Have you ever come across a line of dialogue, a passage in a book or poem, a concept that was so penetrating, so insightful, or so mysterious that you simply couldn't get it off of your mind? Indeed, it is one of the curiosities of human existence that we are haunted by fiction. We're haunted by true events that are captured in dramatic form, and they stay with us. They bore themselves deep within our soul and become life-defining. As a philosopher, I've read numerous philosophical texts, and philosophical texts are generally written without any kind of emotionality. You can't necessarily feel the passion of the author of the text oozing through the page, right? Or radiating through the page, to use a better word. But that is not the case with the Platonic dialogues. Plato, one of the most foundational philosophers, the man to whom all other philosophy is merely a footnote, wrote these remarkable dramatic pieces in which he infused philosophy, where characters argued, and the most profound concepts and ideas were debated within the confines of a stage. And these characters acted out their part. They were avatars for ideas, and yet they also struggled with personal problems that influenced the content of the play. Plato was originally aspiring to be a dramatist, but when he met Socrates, he realized that the key to enlightenment was through philosophy and not through drama. And so Plato threw out all of his dramas from Sophocles. He threw out all of the dramas that he had personally penned, and he became Socrates' disciple. Plato composed a dialogue that has stuck with me my entire life, and I want to recount to you the experience of reading it and explain why it has been so foundational in my intellectual and spiritual formation. Now, this dialogue recounts the death of Socrates. It's called the Phaedo. And the Phaedo is one of the most curious of all the Platonic dialogue. It's curious not because of the sublimity of the arguments contained within it, but because of their strange paucity. The arguments in the Phaedo are not especially strong. And this fact has puzzled philosophers for an incredibly long time, because the Phaedo recounts the death of Socrates, and Socrates gives his final thesis about life, which is that it continues after death. And Plato's arguments for the immortality of the soul barely hold up to scrutiny. And yet, there is a poetic quality to the utterances of Socrates that captivate readers and compel them to come back and untangle the mystery of why the arguments appear so weak. And I have had precisely the same reaction. And while I believe in the eternality of the soul and the eventual resurrection and rejoining of the soul with the body, even I can admit that the arguments contained in the Phaedo for the immortality of the soul don't exactly work. But why is that? Well, it's because Plato, in this instance, is not a philosopher. He is instead a mystic, and he's having some kind of rapturous vision. And I want you to imagine for a moment Plato sitting down, writing through the sheer inspiration, the content of this dialogue, maybe babbling rapturously, perhaps levitating in the way a saint from the medieval times did, right? Kind of an extraordinary image. Plato saw something about the nature of reality that his own conceptual framework lacked the proper vocabulary to put into persuasive, structured words. And he's capturing this vision, as unclear as it may be, in a kind of wonderful poetry. And that's precisely how the dialogue begins. Socrates is being led to his death, and his disciples come to him and ask him what he's been doing. And Socrates confesses, well, I've been writing poetry. An oracle once told me that I was destined to write music, and I never got around to it in my life. And so I've been composing songs, perhaps a requiem, we don't know. And I wonder if some of the poetry that Socrates was composing was part of what constituted the arguments contained in this text. Now, the argument in question that I want to examine in a very intensive way is called the cyclical argument. And it is one of the arguments that Socrates puts forth for the immortality of the soul. Let's read what Plato says Socrates stated about the immortality of the soul. He says these things. Let us consider this. Do not all things come to be from opposites? For example, something that comes to be larger must have been smaller before, and it becomes larger from having been smaller. Likewise, something that becomes smaller does so from having been larger. And so too with things like waking and sleeping. Being awake comes to being asleep, and sleep from wakefulness. Now, is it not also true of life and death? That is, does not the living thing come from having died, and does not dying come from having lived? If this is so, then it seems the souls of the dead must go somewhere after death and come back again into the world of the living. Otherwise, if the living did not come from the dead, and if all that die simply cease to exist, then eventually all things would be dead and there would be no more life. But since the living are born again from the dead, it seems necessary that the souls of the dead exist somewhere and return to life. Thus, life comes from death, just as death comes from life in a perpetual cycle. Now, this idea that smaller things give way to big things, that wakefulness gives way to sleepiness, that sleepfulness gives way to wakefulness, and that life must give way to death, and death, therefore, must give way to life, does not constitute a persuasive set of premises. But Plato, inspired by Socrates, in this rapturous state of revelation, is seeing something that he can't quite articulate. He looks at the majesty of the world and sees that it's filled with an unimaginable amount of life. Life exists everywhere you look. Life seems virtually inevitable. And the earth itself is so fertile. Its fecundity is incomprehensible. It just burgeons with seeds, with eggs, constantly hatching and giving way to new creatures. How could we look at this planet so filled with this mysterious thing called life, of things coming into being and passing away, and not believe that there is some eternality underlying all of it and deep within us also? It's a rather extraordinary idea. I don't think that Plato's vision of the afterlife really reached its full flowering until the incarnation of Jesus Christ. Jesus says something equally haunting in the 12th chapter of the Gospel of John. Greeks, this is very interesting, Greeks have come to him and they want to see Jesus, and they speak to the apostles, and Jesus denies the ability of the Greeks to speak to him, but he does say something substantial, perhaps directed at them. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that these Greeks heard of the fame of Jesus while they were abroad and traveled to Jerusalem to see him. And they're importunately pleading with the apostles, allow us to speak to this unfathomably wise teacher. And why do you think that is? Is it because as they came into Jerusalem, they heard that Jesus' fame had been agitating the Jews, that there were conspiracies of murder about, and they wanted to plead with Jesus, come with us back to Greece. We shall not put a man of your wisdom and insight to death. We did that once, many hundreds of years ago with Socrates, and we have regretted it ever since. And we promise to you that we shall not commit a crime against wisdom or philosophy ever again. You will be safe within the walls of Athens. You will find a place to disseminate the wisdom from the gods. And Jesus, hearing about their plans to rescue him from the Jews and their murderous intentions towards him, says these words in response as the apostles ask, "Will you meet with these Greeks?" He says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit." Oh, do you hear that? Do you hear how it rhymes with Plato's idea? Now, is this also true of life and death? That is, does not living come from having died? And does not dying come from having lived? Compare those two statements. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Indeed, Jesus is speaking directly to the Greeks, who may be intimately familiar with Socrates and with Plato's teachings about his life. And he is speaking directly to them. If you want life eternal, as Socrates promised, you must let me surrender myself to the hands of the Jews, and I must die, that life may be more abundant, that my death can bring forth much fruit. It's kind of an extraordinary idea. But what is the philosophy behind this? What conceptual framework can contextualize ideas this grand and seemingly poetic? Well, the answer is found in Aristotle. Aristotle taught the nature of cause and effect is that there is an actuality that exists prior to a cause. And that actuality affects the thing that it causes. That thing, that effect, prior to the cause affecting it, is filled with potentiality. And in the cause and effect relationship, that actuality passes through the barrier of potentiality, and that effect becomes actual in itself. And in becoming actual, in the smashing of the potentiality, everything that could have been dies and becomes one single thing. And indeed, a corn of wheat is something that is only a potentiality. It exists in a kind of stasis. It is actual as a seed, but its true life only begins when its seedness dies, when it sacrifices its potentiality as a seed to become something else, when it dies to itself. Now imagine for a moment the story of Peter Pan, the boy who never wanted to grow up. Peter Pan was not willing to die to his youth, and so remain confined to Neverland. Smaller things coming from bigger things. Younger things give way to older things. Wakefulness giving way to sleepfulness. Sleepfulness giving way to wakefulness. Life giving way to death. And death giving way to life. All because Jesus demands that the corn of wheat die, that it might not abide alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. What is the commandment that Jesus gives to his disciples? If ye seek eternal life, you must die to your old self, and allow me to make you anew. You are nothing but a seedling. And if you remain in the seed-like sinful state, you will die. You will abide alone forever. But if you die to your sinful nature, I shall actualize you. I shall smash the potentiality of you and make you actual. I shall turn you into a saint, and you shall bring forth much fruit. Henceforth, I shall live no more after the flesh. Though I once lived after the flesh, henceforth I shall live no more after the flesh, but I shall live according to the Spirit and become a new creature. Thank you. Everybody, if you care to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification to be notified of new videos. Have a wonderful day.